Welcome to this reading of the textbook Human Drama. This is the section on the Enlightenment, or the intellectual background of the revolutionary era. Things are changing, and ideas are changing. Setting the stage, the ideas of individual liberty, greater equality among citizens, and the growing importance of personal property are often associated with a general 18th, that is the 1700s, and early 19th, that is the 1800s, century movement called the European Enlightenment. Although the term Enlightenment only came into common use in the mid-19th century, earlier European scientists, political writers, philosophers, and mathematicians had championed its ideals. The key concept for the Enlightenment writers was that humans should use reason to determine how to act. If people could learn to make reasonable choices for their actions, instead of basing those choices on religious doctrines or emotions, they would be able to create a better government and a more just society and experience happiness. Thomas Paine, one of the key writers during the American Revolution, called this period the Age of Reason. So the Enlightenment is this age of reason. Here are some important Enlightenment thinkers. René Descartes, 1596 to 1650, a renowned French scholar, published his Discourse on the Method in 1637. In it, he argued that reasoning was the best way to discover truth. His famous dictum, "I think, therefore I am," was meant to replace "I believe, therefore I am." Descartes was also made major contributions to mechanics and geometry. Isaac Newton, a British mathematician and philosopher, was another key figure in the European Enlightenment. Many historians consider his Philosophy of Nature and Principles of Mathematics, published in 1687, one of the most important books in world history. Newton focused on describing the universe and how suns, planets, and galaxies move and function. Newton demonstrated that everything in the universe functions under the same laws of motion. Newton's picture of the universe prevailed in Europe until Einstein and others proved him wrong 2 centuries later. Along with Leibniz, Newton is credited with developing calculus. Newton was a believing Christian who carefully analyzed the Bible and never allowed his quest for scientific truth to undermine his religious faith. Building on the spirit of scientific inquiry, which is questioning, and the discoveries of scholars such as Newton and Copernicus, the founder of modern astronomy, European scholars enthusiastically applied human reason to social arrangements, economics, and most of all to politics and government. They attempted to understand nature's laws and try to apply those laws to human society and government. The Enlightenment thinkers owed much to earlier writers and philosophers. Certainly the insights of the 13th century scholastics, especially Thomas Aquinas, who had brought Aristotle and other classical Greek philosophers into their systems of thought, influenced the 1700s European Enlightenment scholars. Scholasticism had influenced the humanist movement during the European Renaissance, as European scientists began to study the universe with new measuring instruments, such as the telescope and the microscope. Several important Enlightenment philosophers, including Leibniz, Wolff, Quesnay, I don't know, it's French, and Voltaire, I know how to pronounce that, gained inspiration from the Chinese focus on humanism. Convinced that China's social and political system was firmly rooted in reason and the natural world, they thought that China had the kind of society they hoped to nurture or create in Europe. These European thinkers relied heavily on Jesuit descriptions of China. The Jesuit missionaries in China believed the Chinese had once been, quote, primitive Christians who believed in one God and heaven, and were living according to the laws of nature. However, the Jesuits reasoned, with the coming of Buddhism, this pure Chinese Christianity had been corrupted. Leibniz was seeking a way to escape religious answers for how the universe worked and how humans should organize their lives. He was the first European scholar to study China seriously. As a result, Leibniz was convinced that Confucianism, the Chinese philosophical system of human relationships, and a basis for political action that Europeans should copy. He also believed that Chinese society provided a model of good government that could encourage people to abandon those church teachings that he considered untrue. A committed rationalist, Leibniz believed actions should be based on the laws of nature. Instead of following religious doctrines, he believed that if people reasoned systematically, they could discover the truths of the natural world. Leibniz, like the Confucians, was also a strong advocate for harmony in the natural world and in social networks based on mutual cooperation. Christian Wolff was another Enlightenment scholar who was deeply influenced by China's philosophical and political system. Wolff was drawn to Confucius's secular and rationalist secular philosophy, secular meaning non-religious, as well as to Descartes' fierce rationalism. Wolff described Confucian philosophy, that Chinese philosophy, as a rational system that was close to his own concepts of moral philosophy and was based on natural rather than religious laws. François Quesnay was the founder of the French economic philosophy of the physiocrats. They argued that small landholders were the core of society and that the government's prime goal should be to give people access to land and citizenship. Quesnay advocated a laissez-faire philosophy, by which he meant that government should interfere as little as possible in the economic system. Eventually, these ideas will be enshrined in Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations, where modern capitalist ideas are going to come from. Quesnay may have gotten this idea from the Chinese concept of wu wei, do nothing, and nothing will not be done. Quesnay suggested that the European kings should surround themselves with a group of wise men, like the Chinese emperors had done for centuries. These civil servants and top advisors should be selected entirely on their intelligence and judgment, determined by tests the government administered. Quesnay praised the merit-based civil service of the Chinese, a system the British hope to copy for their own Indian civil service when they take over India. Understandably, Quesnay is often called the European Confucius. Quesnay and the physiocrats influenced Thomas Jefferson and other leaders in the United States. So these new ideas are actually influencing the development of new countries like the US. The French writer Voltaire, another key Enlightenment figure, was vehemently opposed to the Catholic Church and Orthodox Protestantism. He wanted ways to free European nation-states from church control and influence. Voltaire wanted a secular government, a non-religious government, and he objected to the government bureaucracy that was chosen and functioned on the basis of interpersonal relationships. He was also impressed by China's strong humanistic tradition. He cited Confucius's reliance on reason and natural law and urged Europeans to apply China's example in their own society. Although Voltaire and his fellow European intellectuals gave significant credit to India and especially to China's humanistic tradition, they also believed that those civilizations had become static and had lost much of their creative energy. They stopped progressing, according to these Europeans. These European writers believed that by updating Chinese philosophy and mixing it with liberal doses of Greek and Roman thought, they could provide a new script, not only for Europe, but for all people, including the Indians and Chinese. The Englishman John Locke was one of the most influential political thinkers of the European Enlightenment. He was an empiricist, which meant that he looked at the natural world and at actual people in order to develop his insights, not getting those ideas from established authority, as Europeans had been doing, whether looking at the Bible or ancient beliefs. Locke is perhaps best remembered for his idea of a social contract, and this is really important, where political leaders achieve legitimacy by responding to the will of the people. In his Treatise of Government, Locke stated that there is an implicit, which means not exactly written, but it's there, contract between the governed, that is the people, and the governors, the rulers. If the government violates that contract, the people have the right to overthrow the government. Although the Chinese philosopher Mencius had reached a similar conclusion many centuries earlier, Locke's social contract was a radical idea in the age of strong kings, and it was a tremendous threat to their absolute power. It proved to be an important step in the development of democratic governments, and profoundly influenced both the American and French revolutions in the late 18th century. Many words in Jefferson's Declaration of Independence are taken directly from Locke's Treatise of Government. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a French philosopher, also wrote extensively on the social contract between the governed, that is the people, and their government, the rulers. Although he was a rationalist, Rousseau added an emotional and passionate dimension to his political philosophy. He stressed the state of nature, that humans in the state of nature were inherently good It was society and its rules that were corrupt and artificial. Those rules and invasive governments tended to crush the human spirit and destroy human dignity. Rousseau believed good government and a humane society resulted from people voluntarily forming groups. The social contract is what gives the people the fundamental right to create the society and government that best suits their needs. Politics can never be separated from morality. He was also a critic of private property and argued that collectives based on cooperation, rather than on competition, were the most beneficial to human growth. In summary, the Enlightenment, rooted in the ideas of reason and natural law, and drawing on earlier thinkers from India, China, and ancient Greece and Rome, had an enormous impact on the development of modern democratic governments and ideals such as human liberty and the right to own one's right to own property. Enlightenment ideas would directly influence America's faith in individual freedom, personal liberty, and capitalism. They would also help shape the development of European and American societies. The Enlightenment profoundly influenced the leaders of the uprisings and revolutions that erupted onto the world stage after 1775, the first being the American Revolution. The realities of everyday life and the power struggles among the European states, as well as nationalism, were also key factors in these events. So, you want to write a little reflection? What'd you think of this reading? And then we're going to have a discussion in class, so you want to write 3 interesting questions here on this next page. Anyway, thanks for listening. Have a good one.